In the relentless clamor of the 1980s fashion world, where colors screamed and shoulders loomed like battleships, Romeo Gigli arrived like a gentle sigh, like a whispered secret in a room filled with noise. He did not compete with spectacle. He created a parallel universe, one where clothing spoke softly yet persuasively, where every pleat and fold seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. To watch a Gigli creation was to witness poetry in motion, a delicate choreography between fabric and body, silence and expression, restraint and revelation. His genius was quiet but profound. He taught that elegance does not need to shout. It only needs to exist, to linger in the observer's mind like the faint trace of perfume long after the wearer has passed. From the first sketches to the finished garment, Gigli's aesthetic was immediately recognizable. Long sleeves drifted past elbows like soft ribbons, tunics twisted in gentle spirals around the body, collars framed the neck like delicate sculptures. Velvet, chiffon, silk. Each fabric was chosen not for flamboyance, but for subtle dialogue with light and motion. The colors themselves were part of the narrative. Dusty pastels, muted jewel tones, soft grays that hinted at twilight, whispers of rose and plum that felt almost secretive. He wove romance into each garment, yet always with an undertone of quiet power, as if femininity itself had been distilled into its most poetic form. Gigli's designs stood in stark contrast to the bold and brash aesthetic of the era. Where power dressing demanded attention with sharp shoulders and vivid contrasts, Gigli asked for something else entirely: contemplation, observation, intimacy. His garments did not shout, they invited. They asked to be touched lightly, to be worn with awareness, to be noticed for their subtle architecture. Even the most seemingly simple dress contained an entire philosophy, a meditation on proportion, balance, and the delicate relationship between body and cloth. To wear a Gigli piece was to become part of a quiet dialogue between the designer and the world, a living poem in motion. On the runway, this philosophy came alive in mesmerizing ways. Models did not march or stride aggressively, they glided. Their steps were slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic, as if each movement had been composed like a stanza of a poem. Hair fell softly over shoulders, makeup barely there, allowing the natural beauty of the face to harmonize with the gentle drama of the clothing. Each gesture, each turn, each pause became part of the performance, yet the performance itself remained ethereal, intimate, and understated. Attendees were drawn into the atmosphere, compelled to watch closely, to absorb every nuance. The sway of a hem, the fall of a sleeve, the slight shimmer of velvet in muted light. Behind the scenes, Gigli was equally enigmatic. He moved through the fashion world like a quiet observer, forming relationships not out of ambition, but out of shared understanding. Other designers admired him in subtle ways, often sending assistants to study his lines and drapes, to learn from his intricate manipulation of fabric. Gigli, for his part, rarely sought acclaim. He exchanged ideas and observations with his peers in hushed cafes, sketching concepts on napkins, discussing the poetry of proportion, the importance of silence, the intimacy of restraint. There is a story told among his contemporaries. One evening in Paris, after a long day of fittings, he met with a fellow designer over espresso. They spoke not of sales or fame, but of the movement of fabric, the quiet drama of a sleeve, the life that could be contained in a single fold. It was this devotion to subtlety, this reverence for poetry over spectacle, that defined him. One anecdote captures his philosophy perfectly. A client arrived expecting flamboyance and drama, asking for a gown that would command attention in a crowded hall. Gigli listened carefully, his eyes gentle, his hands almost imperceptibly adjusting a sketch. The final creation was a flowing, understated gown, soft as whispered silk, with pleats that moved like shadows, a silhouette that enhanced the wearer without overwhelming her. At the event, heads turned, not because of loud embellishment, but because the dress spoke quietly, insistently, of elegance, presence, and refinement. The power of subtlety had been revealed, clothing that could captivate without demanding, that could enchant without spectacle. Even as the 1990s ushered in minimalism and grunge, Gigli's influence persisted in unseen ways. While his labor-intensive, intimate designs were no longer at the forefront of fashion commerce, fragments of his ethos survived in the work of others. Dries van Noten, Anne de Meulemeester, and early Alexander McQueen all carried echoes of his lyrical approach, a devotion to line, a quiet sensuality, an attention to the unseen poetry in clothing. His garments became treasures, sought after not for trend or status, but for their subtle genius, the way they could transform the wearer into both muse and participant in a living poem. Beyond clothing, Gigli's life itself seemed threaded with the same lyricism that animated his designs. He was known for wandering through studios and ateliers late at night, sketchbook in hand, observing light on fabric, the gentle movement of a curtain in an open window, the way shadows could transform a simple garment into something extraordinary. He spoke in metaphors, compared a tunic to a verse, a fold of velvet to the curve of a stanza, making fashion feel inseparable from poetry. Colleagues recall evenings where he would sip wine quietly, discussing ideas not in terms of commerce, but of emotion, rhythm, and the intangible grace of design. Romeo Gigli's genius was not only in what he created, but in how he created it. Each piece carried intention, sensitivity, and narrative. There was a tension between fragility and strength, between concealment and revelation, that made his work endlessly compelling. To wear Gigli was to inhabit a story, to move through the world as both protagonist and poem, aware of one's own elegance and the subtle language of fabric around one's body. Every sleeve, hem, and collar spoke, not loudly, but insistently, reminding the wearer and the observer that beauty is not merely seen, it is felt, absorbed, remembered, and yet, despite the depth of his influence, Gigli remained elusive. His creations were never about celebrity or spectacle, never about fleeting trends. They existed in a private, intimate dialogue with the wearer, allowing each garment to be reborn in every movement, every breath, every glance. In that quiet intimacy, he carved a place for poetry and fashion, a sanctuary where elegance could exist for its own sake, where refinement was not a weapon but a whisper, and where beauty was not a statement but a living presence. Today, the echo of Romeo Gigli persists, subtle and persistent. Stylists resurrect his lines for editorials, collectors preserve his garments as treasures, and designers continue to study the quiet genius of his proportions and folds. His philosophy, that fashion can speak without shouting, can move without ostentation, can enchant without spectacle, continues to resonate. And in that resonance lies the true legacy of Romeo Gigli. A world where clothing becomes poetry, and poetry becomes a way of being. He created not just garments, but dreams. Delicate, lingering, intimate dreams that drift through the corridors of fashion history, invisible yet indelible, like a soft melody that lingers long after the orchestra has left the stage. To encounter his work is to step into a quiet reverie, to feel elegance as a living presence, to witness the poetry of clothing unfold with every breath and movement. Romeo Gigli, the poet of fashion, remains a testament to the enduring power of subtlety, imagination, and the quiet grandeur of restraint.